And welcome to all our CSC alumni fellows, members and their guests from throughout the whole Commonwealth and across the world. We have leaders from 22 countries, including 18 Commonwealth countries joining us online, so welcome. Welcome too to those joining us here in the room at Coots at 440 Strand in London. This is the first time we've had an in-person CSC event here in the UK since COVID. I'm Peter Flavel, Vice Chair of the CSC UK and CEO of Coots Bank. Joining me today is the Chair of CSC UK, Sir Alan Parker. Though before proceeding on to today's event, I think it's quite appropriate for us to reflect on the life of our late Queen Elizabeth II, former head, naturally, of the Commonwealth. Naturally a sad day for all of us, truly an inspirational female leader for all of us. We come together today to discuss an issue at the core of development, sustainability and prosperity across the world, and that is education and leadership. In the words of a former Commonwealth Prime Minister, by investing in strong education systems and generating equal leadership opportunities across the world, we can make positive and sustainable change. That former Prime Minister, of course, is Australia's 27th and so far my country's only female Prime Minister. It gives me great pleasure to welcome the Honourable Julia Gillard, AC. Since leaving office, Julia has dedicated her time to advocacy, governance roles and writing. In 2021, she was appointed Chair of Welcome, a huge global charitable foundation based here in the UK, which supports science to solve urgent worldwide health challenges. She is also founder and inaugural chair of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London and chair of its sister institute at the Australian National University, ANU. The Global Institute strives for a world where being a woman is neither a barrier to becoming a leader in any field, nor a contributor to negative perceptions of an individual's leadership. In 2014, Julia joined the board of Beyond Blue, one of Australia's foremost mental health awareness bodies, and has been its chair since 2017. She's been a lifelong advocate for increasing access to education, especially in developing countries. Julia was chair of the Global Partnership of Education from 2014 to 2021. Julia has written My Story, a memoir based on her experience of Prime Minister, and her latest book, Not Now, Not Ever, celebrates the 10 years on from her famous misogyny speech, which will be released next Wednesday, and Julia's going down to Australia this evening to be a part of that. As an aside, we're both Adelaideans. We both grew up in Adelaide, and we happen to study at the same time, study law at the University of Adelaide. Also joining in the discussion is our CSC Global Alumni Vice Chair, Dr. Ilka Dunne, who has flown in from South Africa for this event. So thank you, Ilka. She is Global Lead for Leadership and Coaching for First Rand Group. She believes that everyone has infinite potential. By day, she impacts leadership and culture in First Rand, connecting people through meaningful engagements, creative communication strategies, coaching senior leaders to find their groove, and helping young professionals to shake it up. We'll hear more about that. By night, she networks, writes, gardens, reads, and dreams up new projects. Occasionally, she escapes to go diving in the hope of finding total peace and quiet. Kenya's Kilifi Creek is her idea of heaven. She's fascinated by the interactions between all things, and so found her way through a BA in Dramatic Arts, where she was honours, a Master of Education, and a doctorate, a PhD in Leadership. She believes deeply in the power of youth to unlock the future and dedicates her time to helping graduates throughout the South African Graduate Employers Association, and is passionate about connecting leaders across the globe, and as a founding executive board member of the Commonwealth Study Conference Global Alumni Organisation, we've seen her true colours there. Welcome to you both. We're incredibly honoured, pleased and privileged and proud that you've taken the time out of your busy schedules to be with us all here today and online. We're looking forward to your thoughts and experiences on education and solving the gender leadership gap, and I'll now hand over to Sir Alan.
Well, thank you very much. And it is a treat to have people in person again. And also, I hope we've learnt about the real opportunity for digital connection through CSC and Commonwealth Study Conferences generally. It's been such an extraordinary period where we haven't had the fun of gathering people, and that excitement has been at the heart of what the Commonwealth Study Conferences have all been about. I do think what's been terrific through this period is the amount of creativity we've sensed, and particularly with Ilka's team and the alumni, I think around a broader network of the Commonwealth Study Conferences, thinking about, okay, how do we want to challenge ourselves next? How do we make this a real force within the Commonwealth? I think the cause of the Commonwealth as a network of organisations, of countries, and within that organisation, but mainly countries around the world, is stronger than ever, of people who share certain values, who will hold themselves together on certain things, I think is stronger and more important, almost than it ever has been in a way. So I'm delighted to see the kind of vigour and sort of excitement we've had in the last year of people planning what we will be doing in the next few years, and how we will embrace more and more people through other Commonwealth organisations and through our own alumni, and fairly illustrious heritage, I would say. So I think we're in a great place to do it. I think it's wonderful that Julia and Ilka have taken on this challenge today, because I think it's one of absolutely the forefront of many people's minds, and in creating the kind of organisation we want to be a leader in. I think it's always been about leadership. I think it's always been about standing up and saying what one believes in as individuals, and how you make that collectively work together. So no, I'm absolutely delighted, and it's a treat to have everyone here together, and thank you again for Peter and Coots hosting it all. So thanks very much. Peter, are you leading off on this?
No, you are.
Oh, great, okay. Okay, then I've got it very simply. The woman on my right, 10 years ago, Julia, gave what I think at the time was called a trailblazing speech, and you're about to go down on its anniversary. And I was going to only open to say, yes, but if you were giving that speech now, what would be different? What do you, when you look back, because you've really gone into a lot of those subjects, it wasn't a one-off, and when you look back now, what would you say differently now that would be equally provocative?
Equally provocative. I think in the years since, we've certainly come to see much more clearly the gender dimensions and pernicious gender dimensions of social media. And I think that was, at the time I was giving the speech about manifestations of sexism in the political world, I didn't put as much weight on that because, you know, I mean, life has changed so quickly that when I was Prime Minister 2010 to 2013, of course social media was a thing, but it's not the thing it is now in terms of shaping politics, discourse, news exchange, how people get their information about the world. And we know from contemporary studies that it is and can be a very toxic environment for women. Yeah. So there's a lot of research that looks at men and women in politics, and both men and women in politics get pretty hateful things on their social media. Anonymity certainly unleashes people's inner demons, and they put it on social media, but women disproportionately get that. And one of the things that women in politics, women in the public life talk about is a social media exchange will literally go from you've got the policy wrong about, you know, the NHS to, after 2 rounds of exchange, to, you know, you're a bitch, you're a this, you're a that, and I won't use those sorts of words here, but I'm sure everybody can imagine the kind of words that I'm thinking about. So it coarsens very quickly. So that's something that, you know, giving the misogyny speech 10 years ago, I didn't quite foresee, and something we've really got to unpack and deal with if we're going to have a more gender equal environment for women leaders. I do think, I mean, you led it brilliantly, and I thought in your last book, which you wrote with Ngozi, you surfaced a lot of that. And also, what I hadn't picked up was, as you say, you went past the point of how embedded a lot of the unconscious bias is, and how one just didn't realise how deep a lot of that gap was. But also the vulnerability of women in this, in that you can actually knock their ratings more powerfully, that they are more vulnerable to attack, and the impact of that attack is deeper. And that's been a researched outcome now, hasn't it?
And so that's quite a big difference to, and we didn't know that before in the same way. I mean, that is something that has now genuinely surfaced through social media and research from it. That's quite a different thing.
It is quite a different thing. I mean, the psychological research now is very clear that all of us, you know, this is often when we talk about sexism or racism or any other form of prejudice, we think we're talking about other people because we're not like that. But the psychological research shows us very clearly that everybody has in the back of their brains whispering stereotypes about what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman. And we tend to correlate leadership in men with likability. We accept from men hard-hitting statements as showing they're in command, whereas for women we tend to correlate leadership with being nasty, and we certainly don't accept hard-hitting statements. And to give you just one example of that, there were researchers in America, they got 2 groups, randomised controlled trial groups of voters in America. And the experiment was, you know, a candidate was going to come into the room and pitch for their vote, and then they were going to have a little mock vote at the end as to whether you would vote for them. And unbeknownst to the people participating in the research, into one room went a man, into another room went a woman, but they both used exactly the same script. You know, if you elect me as senator, I will do this, that, and the other thing. But the line, it had lines in it like, I'm the kind of person who gets things done, and if I need to step on other people's toes to deliver the job, well, I always do. And coming from a man, that was kind of fine. He's a go-getter, you know, I'm going to vote for him. He'll get things done. Coming from a woman, people were like, no, she's obviously pretty nasty, pretty ruthless. And the voting showed far few people would vote for her of an identical script. So this is surfacing exactly what you're pointing to, that this isn't just atmospheric, it's got consequences in the real world of politics, of business, because ultimately leadership in all of these worlds requires the support and consent of colleagues and various groups.
Completely. And I'd love to come to Ilka on that support from it. But just pushing that from it, I mean, one of the tragedies of that is a lot of people are put off from public office at all, because of what you get coming at you in every possible dimension. And if you really are saying from ethnic backgrounds or women particularly, that is really multiplied, and also the impact of it is multiplied. The danger is, one, we put people off we really need.
Yes.
And secondly, if you are doing it, you've kind of got to stay sane, because it's very, very difficult to deal with that. And again, you've written about, in the past, about things you do, you call them tricks to apply, to say, no, think that they're talking about somebody else, or just don't let it come directly at you. Isn't that right? I mean, how do you cope with that at all? Because it is, I mean, I think it's very different for most people. Is, you know, you see the sheer bile and venom turn up, which doesn't turn up in any other way and anywhere in your life anyway. And how do you deal with that? Because it's so personalised, it's so horrible. And you did develop that, because that's quite important that people develop more of those skills if we're going to get the best people we need up there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think the challenge of getting people into politics is a broader challenge than these issues we're talking about. I mean, I think for many young people today, they look at politics, whether they're, you know, boys, girls, people of colour, right across the community. People look at politics and they say to themselves, I don't believe it gets things done, so why would I devote my life's time to not having an impact? Now, personally, I think they're wrong about that. I think you can get big things done in politics, but I can understand why people watching the ebb and flow of political debate would say, well, they're all just chasing each other with insults and nothing gets done. And then people would see the consequences that it has in the real world for not only for yourself but for your family, what public exposure brings, and then the layer of this differential that it's worse if you're a woman, it's worse if you're a person of colour. You know, I think we've got to have the broader dialogue about how do we change this, and I'm not the expert on it, but I think a lot needs to be done in social media companies and social media regulations so that the bile can't flow as quickly and as easily, and with the algorithm sort of clicking it up, it doesn't flow in that way. But whilst it's still like this, I think there are some skills individuals can develop to try and keep themselves safe. And for me, I certainly did not manage my own social media accounts when I was Prime Minister. I was not there in the dead of night scrolling through my Twitter feed, because that would have been just awful. Yeah. And, you know, even for the things you did see, many of which could be in the traditional media, you had to sort of build up a bit of a wall where you could imagine this as about Julia Gillard, the person in politics, rather than taking it in as really being about your inner you. And there's a bit of a trick in that, but, you know, I think you do have to have that kind of ability to discriminate. And I actually think even, you know, teenage girls looking at their social media feed need that today. You don't have to be Prime Minister to be worrying about it. And you've got to, you know, I mean, we'd all be devastated or thoughtful or whatever if someone really close to us who we knew cared about us said constructively, you know, you're doing this badly, or you need to think about this. Like, we would take that in and we would respond to it at an emotional level, and hopefully we would ultimately respond to it at a reflective level and take it on as it was meant. But the stuff that goes on Twitter, you just can't let it get into your head. And I think we've got to teach, you know, our young people the skills for keeping that back.
At the end of the book you wrote with Ngozi on this, which was terrific fun, you did say it was your editor, though, who teased you and said, yes, but what about the support? Who do you go to for support? Wasn't it that? I thought that was a very interesting point behind it. And that isn't sort of quite coaching, but it is who's on your side. And sometimes you said it's quite surprising who wasn't on your side, particularly as you got more senior. A lot of people go against you, but that is something that one can do to help close those gaps and get people through those periods, don't you think? I mean,
yes, I agree with that. So the book, Women in Leadership, I did have the great pleasure of co-authoring with Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is now the head of the World Trade Organisation. Not an easy job, but she's doing it brilliantly. And we did end up recommending that people think early on about their support groups, which might be family and friends in a sort of personal caring sense, but they're support groups in a career sense. And we did end up using the phrase, you know, for young women in particular, they've got the benefit that they've seen this movie before. You know, they've seen what's happened to other women leaders, and so they can be wargaming with their supporters and friends. You know, what will we do if that moment comes for me? You know, how will I get through it? What strategies will I use? Who will be there to support me? And they can be getting ready.
And that can be in any kind of organisation. It doesn't have to be in public life.
No.
in that. And I was going to bounce over, because that's a bit of what you've really built around Ilka, isn't it? Is about those support and coaching, and allyship is a very important word, isn't it? Allies.
So you know, so it's interesting to me actually that this is one of those unconscious biases that women carry, and I often feel that the words unconscious bias have become almost uncomfortable words to use. Actually, the reality is unconscious bias is actually just our brain's shortcuts. And that's a really good thing, because, you know, our brains have to do a hang of a lot of work every day. So if we had to think through every single moment, our brains would be really busy with that stuff. I think where those mental shortcuts become problematic is when they become systematized.
Yes.
And then they become the way we treat women, the way we treat men, the way we treat people of colour, etc., etc. This notion of women and the communities that they have, there's a lot of research that actually shows that, and I'm going to poke fun at both of you now, because men will have no issue with phoning up somebody that they were at nursery school with and saying, I don't know if you remember me, I sat 2 rows behind you, and I happened to notice on LinkedIn that you're doing X, Y, Z. Do you happen to know that I'm at Brunswick, and Brunswick's got this idea, and could we meet for coffee? And it's done, okay? women go, I really would like to ask her, but she's going to think it's a favour. And if she thinks it's a favour, then I'm going to owe her one. Maybe what I should do is offer to fetch her children once or twice so that by the time I ask, it's not so much of... We do this like we've got to put money into people's bank accounts 25 times before we can ask for something. And so it's actually very hard for women to naturally build those communities of women where they can have those conversations around, you know, this is what I'm grappling with and I don't know how to see my way through it. Or this is what I've experienced. Oh, you've experienced the same thing. Oh, you know how much better it feels when you realise that you're not the only one experiencing it.
Yes, you're not the only one. Yep.
So, you know, I think in particular, I mean, my context is very much corporate, but I mean, I've worked in many contexts prior to that. A lot of work has actually gone into bringing women together. And in fact, the women's programs that we run are actually not at the end of the day about the skills. The skills are nice, but it's actually about those communities that are built. I mean, I was laughing last night. I think I now have 7 Lotus Ladies, that's our women's program at RMB, Lotus Ladies WhatsApp groups from the years. And I still have ping, ping, oh, good luck, go well tomorrow, so pleased you're doing. And that's the longevity of those communities. So, yeah, not to take the community building for granted, but actually to be quite deliberate about how you create spaces. Because women also have to get over their own unconscious biases towards each other before they open up to each other. So I think that's a very deliberate thing that we could all put some focus on.
And you've purposely taken coaching and support as a big part of that. Because quite often, as you say, anyone who feels they're not at home, not in the naturally easiest pathway or route, it is more difficult, you know, exponentially more difficult. It's not a little bit more difficult, it can be exponentially just... Yeah. And you really do believe that it is in those kind of skills and practices that you can break some of those blocks. You can actually support people go through.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think kind of on multiple levels, and it's not just about what we do with women. So, you know, I think one of the hard things when we have this conversation is we often don't talk about the journey that men are going through in terms of what their identity shift is. In a world that is changing rapidly, where actually there is a huge rise towards what are the feminine skills that we need to help us solve some of these really tricky, wicked problems that we have out there. You know, so how do we make it acceptable? Because if you are seen, and I'm going to use the word oppressor, and it's a horrible word, but I'm going to use it for emphasis. If you're seen as the oppressor, it's actually not acceptable in a societal context to actually talk about what it means to be you. It's totally fine for women to get together and have a conversation around what are you grappling with. It's totally fine for people of colour to get together and talk about what does it mean to be this race in this context. You won't find white men sitting at lunch in the canteen talking about what it means to be a white male in the world's context now. And I actually think that's a real problem. I think we need to be normalising the fact that we need to have conversations around how all of our identities are changing and what our identities need to be in order for us to be the best that we can be together.
But isn't that a shift? You made sense. Politics is a confrontational business on a good day.
Yeah.
And business has been a slight case of winner takes all as a mentality, that you're out, you compete, you're against everybody else. And I'll bang it across to Peter now, but I see in the business world, people really, I mean, the danger is you're almost educated, I'm the top, I came out the top of my class, I came out the best, it's me against the class. You're almost educated to be, you've got to be the winner. But actually, what I see a huge amount of business now really valuing and prizing are people who can really work together with other people, because that is what it's going to take to get anything done. So as you say, some of those will be literally seen as female virtue and nurturing, and a lot of those things were not in that model of business and how we create things together and solve problems together. But I see that moving right through business. I mean, I don't know what, but I see business leaders put a totally different value on people who really can, as you say, come together and talk and move people together, rather than be the winner and it's not you against the world, it's actually you with your colleagues delivering something. And I think that's a very, very big shift that's come about quite recently and is accelerating.
I agree entirely, Alan. Many of the issues that we face, difficult issues we face, are collective issues, are not going to be solved by individuals. So the issue around helping women get into education that are disadvantaged, helping them get into leadership roles, quite separately, the challenge on climate, on ESG, those issues are not going to be solved by a company, a government, or individuals. They are collective. There are collective issues, and so on the climate challenge, and Coutts has become the first B Corp, private bank B Corp, and that is all about doing well by doing good and taking into account all stakeholders in decisions that you make, not just the shareholders who are there for their financial returns. That requires a different style of leader, and it's not the alpha male that came out and it's, I'm going to climb Mount Everest and everyone's going to follow. That doesn't work. It's a collective style of leadership. And so on this particular point that Julia is talking about in terms of access to education and female leadership, that is very much a collective issue to solve. Is not for women to solve, it's for us all to solve.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we've come to the stage where we've got people in the audience for the first time, face to face. It's good to actually have things face to face, and we've got a lot of people online as well. And so we do have, I'll start off with the question here that I have online, and it's an interesting one. I'm assuming they'll all be interesting, actually. An estimated 129 million girls worldwide remain out of school and face multiple barriers to education. Educating girls uplifts developing countries and can often be essential to communities surviving. What more can be done to change this statistic? Difficult question, probably a difficult answer, Julia.
Yeah, the answer is a lot more needs to be done, and actually the signs post-pandemic are worse. So we were making progress pre the pandemic, and what was making progress was governments in developing countries themselves increasingly prioritising education and prioritising girls' education, because the evidence is undeniable that if you educate a girl, if she gets to finish secondary school, she will go on to become a woman who is likely to marry later in life rather than earlier. She will choose to have fewer children. The children she does have will be more likely to be vaccinated, more likely to survive infanthood, more likely to go to schools themselves. She will be an economic contributor to her family. The percentage of her income that goes on sort of collective family goals as opposed to individual goals is greater than for men in comparable communities. And so you get on this upward cycle of development. And this became increasingly recognised. The biggest flow of financing for education in developing countries is from developing countries themselves. They were prioritising it. Increasingly, the international aid and development community, through organisations like the Global Partnership for Education, which I chaired, were recognising that it was about girls' education. And agile philanthropy, and I'm the patron of the Campaign for Female Education, which is a very innovative model of scholarships for African girls, were leaning in and making a difference. And then pandemic, school closures, we all know what that was like to live through, but we know from earlier health emergencies like the Ebola health emergency that when schools close, it is the most marginalised girls who are at the greatest risk of never coming back. And where do they go? Well, the family might end up redeploying them onto subsistence farming or some form of child labour, or perhaps doing domestic duties to enable an adult to go out and income earn. These are very poor families, so the calibrations as to who's working, so everybody's at least has the prospect of having food and shelter. That's a very difficult calibration. and child marriage rates go up during these kinds of emergencies. And so we're emerging from the pandemic with the knock-on consequences of schools having been closed for an extended period, with a more difficult environment for overseas development assistance, and potentially, we don't know this yet, but potentially a more difficult environment for philanthropy. And even if people give at the same rate, price inflation means you get less the other end, because that's affecting everywhere and the purchase of everything. So, trends aren't good. For individuals who are very well motivated around these questions, I'd say, do the contact your local MP thing. It does make a difference if members of parliament understand that people are watching what they do with the overseas development budget and whether it's going to girls' education. And there are great charities like the Campaign for Female Education that get incredible results and that take private donations. And in my own family, each year at Christmas time now, in addition to all of the usual stuff people exchange at Christmas, I buy each member of my family a CAN-fed voucher, which means that they've supported through that gift the education of one girl in Africa for the year to come. And I think those sorts of things can really make a difference.
Wonderful idea. We have more questions online, but are there any questions in...
Can I follow up 1 second
please,
on that?
yeah.
Because as you say, this is the first time it slid backwards, isn't it? I mean, from 2000 and the MDGs, we really felt progress, well done. This slide has been a very serious slide. Is there any momentum behind that to get a bit of a catch-up? I mean, what are the mechanisms? I mean, I don't see it out there, but you'll see further and more clearly than I would on this. But to cohere some of the energy, because this is one of the things people can do so directly, and is one of the things you can so clearly measurable impact on. Is there any big conversations around that that you see to try and catch up or even accelerate? Because the academia itself is moving quite vigorously, isn't it? It's somewhere between government, the multilaterals, I don't know where. Is there anything you see emerging, or are we actually going to stay behind? Do you think it will just slow us?
I certainly think people are pushing, and at UN General Assembly week, which has just concluded, when the world once again, for the first time post-COVID, was able to go in person again to the UN, there was scheduled a Transforming Education Summit to try and galvanise all of the people that go to UN General Assembly week. So, the leaders of nation states, of private sector, private philanthropy around education. Now, unfortunately, one of the days planned did coincide with the Queen's funeral, and so quite a large number of heads of state needed to be here in London. But I think that does show that there's a sort of energy to try and refocus and re-steady people on this agenda. But we shouldn't underestimate the challenges. I mean, the best governments in the world put a fixed percentage into overseas development aid, which is factored off the size of their economies. Well, many economies are going to be smaller in size because of the recessionary environment we're in. Inflation takes a toll here. Currency movements can take a toll. I know from my days at the Global Partnership for Education, we did receive very major flows of funds from the UK government. From then, the department was called DFID. But, when the pound went backwards after Brexit, it doesn't have to go backwards much before those flows in US dollars are worth less. And predominantly, if you're working particularly on the continent of Africa, you're expensing in US dollars or into local currencies, but, in and around US dollars. So, there's some real difficulties around, which means that without very consistent political and community focus, we will go backwards.
So energy required.
Energy required.
I would also add to that, because I think sometimes these things feel so far removed from us. We're talking about, governments and big funding and so on and so forth, but the reality is actually on the ground. And I mean, we experience this hugely in South Africa. Even girls that have gone throughout high school, okay, might get to the end of high school and say, you know what, it's really tough. I've got brothers and sisters. I no longer have a father or a mother, or I live with my grandmother. How can I contribute? And actually there's government funding if I have a baby, so I'll just have a baby. Okay, and it's a cycle that traps individuals. And I think there's a role for, when, particularly in the Commonwealth, with a community like the Commonwealth Study Conference leaders, their alumni in your own backyard. You can go and tell stories, you can connect, you can speak in schools to show girls that there is a future past, to inspire, to role model, etc. And that doesn't cost money, that's just your time. So as I say, I think sometimes we feel these things are so far away that how does little old me contribute to this global issue? And that's part of the issue of these wicked problems. They're so big, you think, okay, maybe I'll just climb back into bed. It's just too much. I'll wait for a politician to solve it. But if we all do something deliberately, we can show girls that there's space for them.
And that is part of the point of leadership, and part of what I hope Commonwealth Study Conference stands for. Sorry, Peter, I apologise for distracting you, but it was just so important not to lose ground now.
The gentleman there, and not Eric, the one just, there's a microphone just here.
Thank you very much. Colin Crooks, I'm a social entrepreneur here in London. I would like the panel to talk about what they mean by leadership, because picking up on what Ilka just said, it seems to me that leadership can come literally from anywhere. You see it, young girls in school, let alone in the community, making changes. And I'm wondering if, in the absence of budgets for education programmes, can we do something on the ground, as you say, to help support leadership from within communities that can make real change in their villages or in their towns or their townships? And if so, what could that look like?
I think that's a really great question. It's one we think about a lot at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, because we are, of course, saying that our societies still largely run themselves through pyramid-like power structures. So, there's only one Prime Minister, there's only one CEO, there's only one Chair of the Board, and these people have formal levers of power in their hands, and we want access to that form of leadership to not be distorted by sexism and prejudices around gender, or indeed any other form of artificial barrier that holds people back. But when we talk about leadership, we're also recognising that there are leaders in communities, leaders in families. Leadership is exercised in many informal ways and many influencing ways. I mean, you're talking about girls' education. Malala was a global, and continues to be a global galvaniser. Yes, she's through her own philanthropic endeavours raised money that is used for girls' education, but the outsized effect she has had hasn't been because she's had formal levers of power in her hand. It's because her role modelling and influence has been globally recognised. So we do need to be thinking about and mobilising that too. One of the things that greatly attracted me to becoming patron of the Campaign for Female Education is it's not only a scholarship program to enable girls to finish school, because poverty is holding girls back, the family choices I referred to before, but it stays with the girl as she transitions into whatever is going to come next in her life, which might be more study, or it might be a job, or it might be, because of the nature of emerging economies, being an entrepreneur and creating her own economic model. But the girls, as they become women, are asked to stay involved through what is called a CAMA, which is basically an alumni group, and they're asked to give back to future girls. And the expectation originally was that, one girl would go through and she'd give one scholarship to a future girl. Actually, on average, they give 3 scholarships to a future girl. So you've got an exponential kind of model of change, 1 million girls supporting 3 million girls, and then they'll become women who will support 9 million girls, and on it goes. So I think, you know, those kind of models can make a huge difference.
We've got a couple more questions. Oh, we've got questions everywhere. The gentleman, right. Oh, no, we've got one here. Sorry, yep. Please.
Thank you. Good morning. My name's Emma Thomas. I'm the CEO of the Sunshine Coast Council. And it's been great to have the conversation today, and I'm reflecting on change and change management, and really when we experience change management in any organisation or even in a country, fear is a really strong mechanism that works against change. And I've been reflecting on, you know, some of the commentary that says it's okay for women to be here if it doesn't come at the expense of others. Or, you know, we heard as recently as yesterday a senior man saying that he was feeling like young men were being discriminated against because companies were looking for young women to go into engineering roles. And, you know, that to me is an expression of fear, and, you know, I look at that expression of fear and causing some of the aggression that happens towards women, because ultimately we're changing a whole very strong system that people are afraid of missing out. And I'm curious about what needs to happen, you know, more from all of us as leaders to help allay that fear, help people know it's going to be all right. You know, how does that change happen if we can't allay that fear?
I think that's. I'll start. I don't claim to have the answer, so I hope others have got some thoughts too. But I think one of the things we need to do, and we often don't do well enough, is explain that a more equitable and inclusive world will actually be a better world for everyone. And it's partly, you know, there's a moral force to that. There's an evidence force to it, which is, you know, increasingly the research is telling us that diversity in teams, in decision making, leads to better decision making. And I think it's also a product of, you know, gender. Looking at gender, obviously we can look more broadly, but looking at gender unconscious biases and norms don't just impact women. There are a lot of men, and I mean, you might be able to reflect across your generation. There were a lot of men who possibly would have made a different job choice, a different family caring choice in terms of their involvement in the life of their children, if it had been viewed as acceptable. So, you know, if we go back, well, I mean, I think this is true even today, but certainly for my generation, you know, a boy I went to school with, if he announced grandly he wanted to be an engineer, everybody would have gone, that's fantastic. If he'd announced grandly he wanted to be a childcare worker, everybody would have gone, what's wrong with him? And various very unpleasant insults about sexuality, I suspect, would have followed, because, you know, kind of men didn't devote their lives to the care of children. Men didn't take, you know, extended time off, maybe a few years off, to be the principal carer for their children. No, men kept getting on, you know, the train at 7 in the morning and not getting back until 8 o'clock at night, and missing all of that of their families' lives because that was the expectation. So if you can throw all that up into the air and actually say, what is the life you would best want to lead, that is actually a better world for everyone.
Yeah,
and getting rid of some barriers too. So we've just announced a change in the paternity allowance, paternity policy here for a full year for men. So it's going to be interesting to see what changes.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say that, because, you know, some of the research that's come out of countries where they have changed the paternity policy and they've allowed men to choose whether they want to spend the majority of time, so the family can make the decision. And understand these are in contexts that are not the traditional nuclear family. These could be, you know, families, same-sex families, etc., etc. So, but in those contexts, that they have found that the level of aggression in the country has come down, which is an interesting stat, I think. I mean, I think also this notion of we have these very formulaic language around these roles. Okay, and I often think the role of mother, yes, that role has a gender element to it, but the verb mothering is actually something that doesn't have to have a gender. So one of the things that we've instituted in the organisation is actually parental coaching. And, you know, for women, particularly in an investment banking environment, there's quite a lot of stress around, oh, well, what are they going to think if I have a baby? Now I'm not going to be there, my corporate finance role, my whatever. If I leave, will they remember who I am? How many deals will happen while I'm away? There's a whole lot of stuff that goes on for them. So what can we do to prepare them to off-board and then help them again when they're on board? But the interesting thing has been that we actually have an almost equal take-up between men and women for parental coaching.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
So men are equally concerned about how is my life going to change if I now have a young one. I mean, I clearly remember my husband, you know, making a very deliberate choice that he would rather go into the office at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning so that he could actually be home at 4 o'clock, because then we could have an evening together and he could have time with the children. Those were very deliberate choices, rather than, you know, we all just get on the train we've always been on and it has to be the same way.
I know we have another question right at the back.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Obik Sen. I'm from the Commonwealth Secretariat. I'm Head of Innovation and Partnerships there. Since this is the Commonwealth Study Conference, I wanted to ask the panel what their advice would be to the governments of Commonwealth countries. And as we all know, I'm sure it's a very diverse community. We've got 56 countries now. In one sense, the Commonwealth is doing better than the rest of the world when it comes to empowering female leaders. Very recently, we had the last Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Rwanda, you know, about 10, 20 years ago had hardly any female MPs, and today they have more than 60% MPs, you know, are female. Similarly, we have Bangladesh, where, you know, through grassroots financial empowerment, economic empowerment, yet overall, the picture is not looking very rosy for the Commonwealth for reasons that the Prime Minister and other panelists mentioned: economic downturn, squeezed public finances, you know, climate change, all these macro factors that are putting pressure on the public purse, which then obviously leads to hard choices. And we see many of our governments pulling back from funding those programs and those policy areas which are very critical to exactly the things we are talking about, just because they can't afford to. So my question to the panel would be, from your particular vantage points, if you had to recommend some public policy options to governments, either at the national or the multilateral level, to, yes, we know times are difficult, but to keep them on the straight and narrow for this particular purpose, what would your recommendation be?
I might just add to that, because we had a very similar question online, which was directed to, I think, Julia probably, about what governments can do, but also what corporations could do. There was a separate point around businesses helping as well.
Yeah. I think I'd probably just like to start with a few reflections about the Commonwealth and then come more directly to what people can do. I mean, obviously, the loss of Queen Elizabeth has led to a period of reflection here in the UK and in other parts of the world, and a period of reflection about the future role of the Commonwealth. And it may well be that a number of countries choose to become republics and reshape their head of state arrangements in this period. And obviously there's been ongoing discussion about this in Australia, and there'll be, I think, a methodical discussion over the next few years about it. But that to me doesn't mean, and I think in some of the media reporting that got conflated with problems for the Commonwealth. And as we all know, countries can be in the Commonwealth irrespective of what arrangements they've made as to who is their head of state. And we in looking at the Commonwealth, need to be clear-eyed and frank about its history, and there are many issues to wrestle with there about colonialism and dispossession that have to be at the forefront of the dialogue. But I do think in today's world, the Commonwealth has got quite a significant or potentially significant geopolitical role to play, which is it is useful for leaders to have a forum for intense exchange without the big beasts in the room, without, you know, the US, China, Russia, with not that Russia's a big beast, but obviously factoring in a particular context in geopolitics, not anywhere near the heft or size of the US or China. But it can be, I think, empowering for leaders to be able to have dialogue with each other without the geopolitics immediately being defined to how are you reacting to the presence of the US or the presence of China in the room. I think if I spoke about this a number of years ago, but I particularly think now, as the Commonwealth is reconceptualising its role, that there's work to do on that. The traditional, you know, sort of bailiwick of the Commonwealth has been in human rights, democracy building, rule of law, and all of these things, you know, take us to equity, inclusion, including gender equality. So I think keeping that as a priority for the Commonwealth is very important. For governments, I know how hard it is. I personally do know how hard it is, and that not every decision, you know, you make can live up to this ideal. But if the pandemic's taught us anything, it's taught us that the big threats in our world don't end at someone's shoreline. No matter where you are, who you are, they come for you. And, you know, the pandemic came for all of us. Climate change is coming for all of us. The consequences of large-scale people movement driven by climate change factors, driven by economic inequality, that's impacting the world for everyone, and so it goes. And so whilst, you know, to hold government, you've got to be holding the confidence of the voters in your nation state, trying to explain to people that you've got to connect this with that global environment, I think is the contemporary sort of work of politics, and would then enable more of the good things that you pointed to in your question.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for corporations too. It's a dialogue with shareholders, and you alluded to it before that, you know, ultimately the future of our business is about more than dividends this quarter.
Yeah, I mean, I would also add that I think forums, I mean, you know, your forum is a forum, and we're going to have lots of conversation about it, but that brings together partnerships in the Commonwealth. And I think, you know, CSC is a prime example of, you know, when you bring people together from different contexts, you can gain insight into other contexts without the value judgments. I mean, I was in the 2015 program in the UK, and we had a kind of monumental moment that shifted my thinking entirely, which was a conversation on smart cities and lots of energy and excitement in the room. And then a woman got up and she said, this has been really interesting, and thank you for everything you've shared. But I'm a minister in Tanzania, and I'm just trying to work out how to get water to my people. Mm-hmm. And it was a really interesting moment, but it was actually not that moment that was most interesting. What was most interesting was that the conversation immediately went into, let us in the developed world tell you how to solve it. I was like, whoo boy, have you ever been to Tanzania? It's a little bit more complex than maybe you understand. And it led to us actually having conversations around these words like developed and developing are actually quite useless when it comes to having real conversation, connected conversation. We should be talking about evolving countries, because we're all evolving. I mean, you look at Kenya. Kenya has got some amazing financial inventions that could not have been invented here, because structurally, you know, the UK has years and years and years of we do it this way, and our structures are based on our thinking patterns, etc. So there's stuff we can learn, and if we come together in communities like the Commonwealth Study Conference communities with some real issues on the table, and we can truly meet each other and see each other eye to eye, I think then we can have real impact on some of these things. I'd love these conversations.
Well, can I say,
Right in there.
I think we've hit a couple of very, very big subjects. I might almost drag Eric in for a moment in a second on this one about that experience of it. I think one of the things you said, one, you articulated beautifully, I think, some of the values underneath the Commonwealth that I think are really precious. And there aren't many natural networks in the world that can stand for them in that way. And I think, as you say, the sad loss of Her Majesty reminded everybody what an amazing woman she was, apart from it. Just as a woman, this is an extraordinary person. And as a leader, incredibly impressive. But also the values she stood for. Yeah. And that is not the old colonial version. It is actually what are those values and how are they relevant and how do we keep them. I do think one of my worries on that question is how do you hold people to their funding commitments still in this world? It's going to be really, so in a direct way, if we're caring about, as we say, education, soldiering, gender leadership, there are some real commitments, and you said it, right to MPs, right to people, it does make a difference. I think you could hold them to that. Just for a moment, if we can, on Commonwealth Study Conferences, it was very funny. In 1956, Prince Philip started this thing, and his thought was, there's leaders all over the Commonwealth. They're all over the place, and how do you get them to learn more? He once gave me quite a hard stare, and he said, you're all very quick to come up with solutions to things. He says, the idea of this is just get people together so they can look at them. It's called a study conference. He said, come and listen to each other, come and learn from each other, and then you can go back and invent your own way of doing it in Tanzania or wherever it is. But it wasn't, oh, we got that solution, we got it. So he said, be very careful about that. He said, but the key thought was, it was quite interesting, because then it was industrialization that they were looking at. You could almost, when you look at the early papers, switch in globalization. But that, I think, was very important. And I think the idea of, and it comes from the question I think you raised on leadership earlier, what is that change in leadership? And I think in the new power world, it is very different. Henry Tim's book, New Power, is very brilliant, because it's not the old master, the old alpha man or woman giving it out. It is understanding the energy in a community, in a society, in a nation, and geopolitics, and how do you work with that in a different way? And that's a very different thing. And I would hope, and I was just going to say, because Ilka, you touched that one, if there was a microphone, is there one? Eric did, of course, his description of going on a course and how it transforms a leader, because a part of what we were trying to do was not maintain the classic leadership approach to that. It was an immersive experience of meeting other extraordinary people, which would open the aperture of leaders, wasn't it? It was opening, and just for 30 seconds, 90 seconds, Eric, it's worth you picking that up on.
Well, Eric also had a question, I think.
But I can't do both.
I've seen you do lots of things.
I'm a trustee, Eric Thomas, I'm a trustee of Commonwealth Study Conference UK, and I went to the 1995 National CSC Conference. And at that stage, I was Dean of Medicine, and I was classic medicine, right in the medicine furrow. I really couldn't see beyond it. It had been my life. And what going on that conference did, and spending some very intense time with 14 other people in West London, was move me out of that furrow and make me see the rest of the world, and what talent there was in the rest of the world, by the way, and how people in industry and the civil service and in the trade unions were talented and had different ways of thinking. And it completely changed how I viewed the world and how I viewed my place in it. And I think it's fair to say I went on to be Vice-Chancellor of the University of Bristol, and I don't think I'd have ever been that if I hadn't gone on the Commonwealth Study Conference in 1995. I'd have just carried on in medicine, and whatever would have happened. It was a seminal moment, and I'm sure that there are other people in the room who've been to conferences who had exactly that same experience.
Well, thank you, Eric. And we're going to hear from Ian Anderson shortly from Canada, but we've got about the next conference in Canada. But we've got one final question. Are the SDGs effective in advancing opportunities for equality and particularly education for girls and women?
My answer to that is yes, in this sense that it relates back to what Alan said before about accountability. If we didn't have the SDGs, we wouldn't have a global mechanism that helps people shape their actions and mobilise around. But we also, and very tellingly, would not have a global mechanism that holds people to account.
Yeah.
And you can quibble about some of the metrics and measures and, whether people put in as much information as they should put in. And the system is by no means perfect, but it's certainly better than not having a system that gets people to transparently show where they are on sustainable development. And the Millennium Development Goal, which was an access goal, had flaws because it wasn't addressing quality, but it certainly did drive an increase in access. And the SDG goal of both increased access and increased quality, I think, people will be looking at where we are now, stock taking, thinking how far we are from 2030 and working out what they can do so that the direction of travel looks better in 2030.
Yes. And for people like me and business, we like structure and discipline, and it provides a structure and discipline to saying what things need to be done.
And a metric. It gives you trackability. I think the one thing that we all have to be cautious of around the SDGs is that they are not seen as entirely independent because they are so interwoven that if you had a singular solitary focus on one SDG and you went for all the metrics on that, you might in fact do damage on one of the others. So I think you always have to have an integrated view of these things.
That's true.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, the time's come to wind up this part of our discussion. It's been an important opportunity, I think, to explore some of the most important issues at the heart of education and solving for the gender leadership gap. A couple of thoughts, although it's difficult to summarise, but Julia, right at the start when you talked about the whispering stereotypes in our brains, I think that's an interesting thing for us all to think about when we think that we're always very balanced, but actually you think about it, there's actually something in the back of your brain or on your shoulder saying something different. And then your comments about the question around what is leadership, and this difference between men and women where likeability and showing command in a man is associated with leadership, but for women it could be being nasty and ruthless and hard-hitting. And that experiment you outline of a woman and a man saying the same words in terms of pitching to be elected and a very different outcome purely because they're a man or a woman is something for us to reflect on. You also, Ilka, and yourself talked about the importance of support groups, family and friends for sure, but also in a career sense and the importance of wargaming and getting ready and predicting what might happen so you're not always thinking in the moment and you've got a support group around you. And then one of the other things that struck with me, Julia, was this, the considerable benefit of completing secondary education for women. And you went through quite a number of incredible statistics about the importance of that at that step. And Ilka, you talked about actually we need to be aware that all of our identities are changing, and it's not just a thing in respect of female or colour. There's also an aspect for men as well. So Julia Gillard, the Honourable Julia Gillard, AC, thank you again for sharing your incredible insight and experience with us. Best wishes with the trip down to Australia. It's a long one, as we know, and the launch of your new book on the 10th anniversary of that important seminal moment in Australia's and in women's leadership. Ilka, thanks for travelling here again from Joburg. This shows in very real way the partnership at the heart of today's event between the Global Alumni and CSC UK, and long may that be the case, and it will be. Now, this was quite opportune for Ilka, you to talk about the life-changing experience that occurred to you from hearing another lens on an issue. And then Eric, you talked also about actually being taken out of your comfort zone, if I can call it that, of seeing the world in one way. And so while I haven't attended one of the conferences, what I hear from alumni is the attendance being a life-changing moment or series of moments that has caused them to see the world in a particularly different way. And we have Ian Anderson, our great friend of the CSC, in live shortly from, well, I can see him live, you can't yet, maybe you can. As most of you are aware by now, having possibly submitted an application or recommended a friend or work colleague, the next CSC conference is happening in Canada. We're really excited in June of next year. Probably Ian's the most excited. This is all part of a process of keeping the Duke of Edinburgh's grand experiment alive, the importance of study, bringing Commonwealth leaders and emerging leaders from all walks of life together to solve and study some of the biggest issues of our time. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Ian, Chairman of the Canada 2023 Organising Committee. He's joining us from Canada. Thank you for your time, Ian, and we'd love to hear an update on Canada 23. Thanks, Ian.
Oh, hi, everyone. I hope I'm on now. I can't really hear at my end, so it's...
you're good.
I give you the thumbs up so I can get going, so that's great. Thank you very much, and wonderful to be here. Just a fantastic website, very much in the spirit of the Commonwealth Study Conferences. So congratulations to all the organizers, and the speakers were fantastic. Thanks for the opportunity to speak about CSC 2023, and greetings from Agnes De Leonardi and our Canada Committee. The core of what we do as a community, as you know, is the development of emerging leaders, and the conference is the platform where we do it. 2023 is a very special conference. It's a renewal of the global conferences after a 15-year gap or hiatus, under the enthusiastic leadership of the Princess Royal and our chair, Darrell White. Applications for the study conference are open until October 10th, another couple of weeks. We're very pleased to know that there are over 300 fantastic applications in from 34 countries so far. And so it's all looking very strong. I've run the CSC before, and I've run 5 other of the major study conferences. And my experience tells me we're going to have well over 600, maybe 700 applications by the time the online application process is open. I think it's an amazing statement about how enthusiastically the alumni in particular have spread the word about this opportunity and the renewal, because that's really where the power of the message is coming from. It's the alumni community. Applications are strong right across the Commonwealth. It's remarkable to see. Nigeria, India, Pakistan, Ghana, Australia, I can go on and on. It's really quite fantastic. We're a little slow in a couple of areas, but I think we'll probably make it up before the deadline on the 10th. The website, as you know, has got a lot of information on it for anyone who wants more than you're going to get here, but you'll be able to see the online application and all the background on what's going on. So we open in Banff on June 3rd next year at the World Heritage Site there in the Rocky Mountains. It's just a spectacular place. It's going to be a great introduction to Canada and to the enthusiasm of the conference process. We've got a great speaker list that's online, and it's strong and getting stronger. We have one Nobel Prize winner in there now, and we'll have I think someone who will be on the list in the next couple of years will be part of that as well. The conference theme is engaged leadership for inclusive change. So again, very much in the model of what you were discussing today. We close in Montreal 2 weeks later with the Princess Royal presiding. And I should just mention as an extra little push on that for car fans, that's just a couple of days after the Montreal Grand Prix, if you want to come over for that. And in addition, for Beatles fans, we've got 4 nights booked at the John and Yoko Suite at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel, where they recorded "Give Peace a Chance." So we're going to be raffling out that room to the key volunteers for 1 night each. Once again, there's an opportunity here to spread the word. There's another 2 weeks for the application process. And as we know, the alumni, again, are just so key to this process. We know from the applications we're seeing coming through, because we are asking the question, 75% or so are saying they're applying because someone who is an alumnus of the conference had told them it would be good for them in terms of their career and in terms of their personal development as well. So just spreading the word is really, really key. Finally, there's going to be a 2-day alumni event in Montreal immediately prior to the closing plenary. And word on that, and the sign up for that will be going out just after October 10th, after the final applications are closed. And just as a closing note, for those who have been through all the ups and downs of CSC 2023, going back a couple of years and pre-COVID, and it's been a remarkable process to get here. I just want to let you know what the management secret is to these conferences, and it's a quote from that great movie Shakespeare in Love, and which goes like this: "The natural condition is one of insurmountable obstacles on the road to imminent disaster. Strangely enough, it all turns out well. It's a mystery." And in a summary, that's kind of what the Commonwealth conferences have always been. It's a bit of a mystery. It's a wonderful process, and it creates amazing learning for just an amazing group around the Commonwealth. We want to see it now continued without any interruption for many decades to come. So thank you very much, Peter, and it's been great to be a part of this.
Well, Ian, if we weren't already excited, we're even more excited now about a magical, marvellous, mysterious tour in Canada coming up next year. So thank you. I'm going to say a few closing remarks.
Peter, if you're addressing me, I can't hear it all at this point. So I'm just a picture.
Good. I won't say anything good. Thanks, Ian. I'm going to say a few closing remarks, and then we're going to play the Canadian video in support of the conference. So thanks, Ian. Thank you again to Julia, Ilka, our chair, Alan here today. We are launching for the CSC UK a new LinkedIn site, the HRH, the Duke of Edinburgh's Commonwealth Study Conferences UK, and shortly a new website as well. That's all a part of ensuring that we're engaging with our alumni here in the UK as best we can. More to come. We'd like to have further reconnection with those people who've attended previous programs. Finally, it's come to say goodbye. So from wherever you are in the Commonwealth or in the wider world, thank you for joining us today. I hope you'd have enjoyed this CSC Global Leadership event, as we've got used to delivering these things online. There is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes here, and so an organising committee has been working very assiduously for some time. So thank you to everyone who I'm looking at now for their support, and the partnership between CSC UK and the Global Alumni continues to go from strength to strength. And so thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
In June 2023, 300 young leaders from across the Commonwealth will meet in Canada. For 2 weeks, they'll work together in study groups. They'll tour the country, meet with leaders in government, business, labor, and community service. Their goal, to report as a team on engaged leadership for inclusive change.
Attending this program is worth every ounce of effort and sacrifice that you may have to make in order to join.
You're going to meet leaders who are going to inspire you to even greater heights, and you're already a fantastic leader.
The people you'll meet, places you'll go, the access you'll get to things, it will fundamentally change your thinking.
This conference will determine the type of leader you will be.
It was called the Great Experiment by its founder, the Duke of Edinburgh. Young leaders in business, government, labor, and the community sector from across the Commonwealth gathered in Oxford in 1956 to work, travel, debate, and engage with each other.
The whole success of the conference depends not on what you decide, but what you talk about, and the opinions, however provocative, which are aired.
It was such a success, it was followed by many more global and regional conferences. And now Canada will host Commonwealth Study Conference 2023 under the leadership of Her Royal Highness Princess Anne and Chair Darrell White, CEO of BMO Financial Group. Working together in study groups, participants will explore what engaged leadership for inclusive change means to them.
16 team members from 12 countries. This can happen only in CSC.
Having emerging leaders representing business, representing NGOs, unions, really does create a mixture of very diverse people.
The core lesson was just the importance of listening and learning and acknowledging and entertaining different points of view.
Conference participants will have Canada, the world's second largest country, as their classroom.
You'll have the opportunity to meet, share experiences, and network with high-level leaders of industry, business, civil society, and government. Your perspective of leadership and how to approach the modern sustainable development challenges we all face will be metamorphosized.
We can't fix COVID without cooperation. We can't fix peace and security without cooperation. We can't deal with climate change without cooperation.
When we presented at the end of the program, it really was a distillation of the diversity of the group.
The real powerful message for me was within that diversity, there was great strength.
The Great Commonwealth Leadership Experience is coming to Canada in 2023.
At the bottom of it all, and the whole point of everything we do is for the benefit of people.
It's really important the participants for the CSC 2023 come with the unique experience of their countries and share it.
Right now, each one of you thinks you know what leadership is. I would love you to go to that conference and expand your idea of what leadership is.
Your thought process will be challenged by equally bright leaders of tomorrow.
You as a group have to coalesce around what those common values are and what the solutions are and how you can help people.
You'll become a better global citizen, one who understands and can empathize with individuals and cultures globally.
Go to Canada. This is something incredibly unique and incredibly special.